Hello, everybody, and welcome to Southfront TV. Today is a special day for us because we have an important interview with one of the most important and influent economists in the world. So it's a really a big honor to welcome Mr. Martin Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong, welcome to Southfront TV.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thanks a lot. Let's start talking about a story that you wrote some days ago. Some days ago, because before Joe Biden drops out from presidential race, you wrote "stand down," and now that's these words sound like a prophecy, but. I know your point of view. I know your way of understanding the world, the economic world. Could you explain deeply the meaning of that article, please?
You have to understand that in most governments there is what we call the deep state, and they have their own vested interests. They're not elected. They're the people that really run everything all the time. And Donald Trump effectively is an outsider. They don't like him. They don't like RFK. Honestly, the protection that he was provided was so outrageous. It was more or less the same thing as JFK. It was very clear that I wrote even in the beginning of the year that they could not possibly cope with Trump winning because he stands against everything that they are pushing for, from climate change to war, etc. So that's why I say, the shooter basically they knew he was there. People were screaming, hey, there's a guy on the roof, and they did nothing. So standing down is basically just let it happen, and then blame it on the same thing with 9/11. They had advanced knowledge. Homeland Security even was created because Congress said, oh, well, some agencies had information, but they didn't share it. It's just the way things go. If they allow certain things to happen, they get more power.
Okay, perfect, Mr. Armstrong. But just today you wrote about the political agenda of Kamala Harris. So it's a crazy thing to try to elevate the tax rate to 35%. Maybe I'm wrong. Which is the most important pattern in political agenda for a presidential race in 2024?
Well, they honestly, the left side or the Democrats, they just never learn. They keep raising taxes because I think it's more like they want to punish other people rather than does it make any economic sense. Every time you've raised taxes, the economic growth declines, and I don't care what government you're looking at. If somebody has more money to spend, and they create more jobs. You take that money and you put it in government's pocket, and it's always wasted. Government creates no jobs. Anybody that works for government actually does not produce anything. It's kind of like having a maid at home. She cleans your house, but she doesn't bring in income.
In 100 days, less or more, we'll have a new president for the United States. But it's really difficult from the other side of the moon try to understand which is the real economic reality of the United States. What's happening, Mr. Armstrong?
I think basically you're just looking at not just the United States, but Europe too. Everything is becoming very polarized politically. You saw it in England. You saw it in France. United States is the same. It used to be, okay, fine, the other side won and we all got along. But now the politics has changed to the point that if one side gets in, they want to force their agenda upon everybody else. That's not civilization. Civilization historically is when we all come together because everybody benefits. When one side starts to punish the other side, civilization no longer makes sense. So that's why you'll most likely see the United States eventually break up into different regions. The same thing in Europe. There are different cultures, beliefs, etc. There in Italy, you have different philosophies than people up in northern Germany. That's just the way life is. California is like a foreign country to somebody in Florida. You just have political differences, and I should say that the governments always want all power, and all you have to do is look at Russia. When Lenin, his idea was to create the Soviet Union like the United States, that each state retained its sovereignty and could exit if they chose to. Stalin, it's widely assumed that he poisoned Lenin, and Lenin had even written a letter and saying, "Do not let him follow me." And Stalin usurped all the power into centralized control. And anytime you do that, economically it declines. One size, does not fit all. Even in the American Civil War, the North was basically industrialized, the South was more agricultural. You have different economies throughout the whole region. Same thing you see there in Italy from the North versus the South.
Okay, perfect. At this point, it's important a question, because you are talking, we know that your model is created by looking at the history, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, and you explain it very well. And we believe in your model. A question, the United States is divided like never before. How high is now the risk of a civil war after the election race?
It is turning more violent. The left usually is the most violent. That's simply the way every country you look at, that's what happens. So this election is not going to be accepted by either side. I think it began with Hillary when back in 2016, everybody that voted against her, she called them the deplorables. You just insulted half the country. And I think that has polarized things ever since.
We have some questions for you coming from Tokyo. A friend of ours, Julian McMahon, Geopolitica analyst, recorded this video message that I pleased the director to put online so Mr. Armstrong could listen.
Hi, I'm Julian McMahon. I'm a Canadian living in Tokyo. For the last 30 years, I've been a geopolitical analyst, consultant, and media specialist. I've worked for the Prime Minister's Office, the Foreign Ministry, the Self-Defense Forces, the Japanese military-industrial complex, and almost every major company in Japan, not to mention major companies in the U.S. and abroad. So I have a lot of experience. When I went to Martin Armstrong's website and read his materials, I was very impressed. Politically and philosophically, I come from a different place than he does, and I'm very skeptical about, well, almost everything. So you would expect me to disagree with him on a lot of points. But actually, I agree with a lot of things he has to say. His is a valuable point of view that needs attention. His opinions bear listening to and thinking about deeply. Some questions for him. I take it from your writings that you think that democratic institutions are going to collapse in the U.S. and other countries in the collective West. Does that mean the collapse of federal states, such as the American Union or Confederation in Canada? What will the results be? Do you feel that America will undergo a debt crisis and a major economic crash? If so, when? Will that be also a global crash? Will this contribute to the collapse of American political culture? Assuming that Trump becomes president in 2024, 2025, how might that change things? What if Kamala Harris becomes president?
Well, we are in a debt crisis globally because all governments since World War II have been borrowing with no intention of paying anything back. And historically, when the default comes, it's when, because you're in these Ponzi schemes, you're borrowing new debt to pay off the old. Historically, this has happened many times. The debt crisis takes place when you can no longer sell the new debt to pay off the old. There are no buyers. That's when it all comes, crashing down. Two, that this is also why they need war. After war, they basically get to create a new government, and they default on the debt of the old. Even the United States did that. You can see, you can buy on eBay continental currency. The Constitution said that they would honor the debt, but they did not. So basically, you're looking at this. This is why they need war as the excuse, because they know financially the system is beginning to collapse. It's also why they're pushing for digital currency. All the governments I've met with around the world, they all pretty much are the same. They believe that about 35% of the economy is underground, that they don't pay taxes. And if they go to a digital currency, eliminating all physical money, then they'll collect those taxes. So as far as our computer shows that Trump should win, the reason I warned that they might try to assassinate him in advance is because he represents too much of a kickback against their agenda. And so I think what you're going to really look at is that since they were unable to assassinate him, then you're likely to see them pushing for some sort of a geopolitical confrontation before he takes office, to trap him into this so that he can't get out of it. You'll also see them come out with the slogans again that, he's a puppet of Putin because he doesn't want war. So these are the sorts of things that you're kind of really looking at. Economically, it's just, we've simply gone down the road too far. That's it. And for example, you have Blinken, who's the head of the State Department, threatening China over Taiwan. Well, China sold off $53 billion of U.S. debt in the first quarter. And so they're not going to be buying debt in the future. So this becomes the problem, If you cannot sell the debt, that's when you default. Okay, but this is happening on a global scale. This is why Europe, I mean, I just got back from Europe, and the 3 governments are all, promoting war. I mean, they're in Italy. Your prime minister has 2 people on her cabinet that are very pro-Russia. To start war with Russia. She even came out and said that Russia will be forced to accept our terms. How? You have the former head of NATO coming out saying, oh, Russia will never use nuclear weapons, so don't worry about that. They act as if they can invade Russia, just walk in, take the place. Putin will drop to his knees and say, oh, okay, forgive me. These are not realistic ideas, but I've seen them for so many times. And I've just worked with government for a long time. All governments, even when China was becoming, capitalist, basically, I went over there and I was invited by the central bank after the 1997 Asian currency crisis. So I was, actually answering questions how you become capitalist. So I've dealt with governments all around the world, and I don't see much difference. Once you're in power, you want to hold on to that power. And it's not about the people or the economy or anything else. Pushing war is always highly inflationary. The Vietnam War broke, Bretton Woods and the gold standard. You fix gold at $35, but you continue to increase the quantity of dollars that you printed. I think a 3-year-old with a pocket calculator could figure out that's not going to work. But, unfortunately, governments will always rule in their own favor. You can look at Plato, and he quotes a debate between Socrates and Thrasymachus. And Thrasymachus basically said that justice is the same in all forms of government. It's only the self-interest of those in power. Nothing's changed. In 4,000 years, what has changed? That's why I look at history, because history does repeat because human nature doesn't change. Okay, fine. People say, oh, well, the Romans, they were just throwing spears, etc. Well, so, if they wanted to kill you, they used the sword. Now they use a gun. And then we get to nuclear weapons. They still want to kill you. That's still the human nature behind the issue. So the weapon doesn't really matter. It's why these people do the same thing all the time. So I think that I hope that answers all those questions. The computer does show that Trump's going to win, but I am afraid that they're going to go to Plan B, because you have to understand that Trump. I've dealt with governments for nearly 50 years. I was in Washington when Ronald Reagan won. And they said at that time that, they were all upset. And I said, what's the problem? And they said, oh, you don't understand. I said, well, tell me, what's the problem? And they said, he's a governor. He's not from Washington. We're going to have to train him. They don't like anybody from outside of Washington. That's why they hate Trump. But they also don't like Kennedy for the same reason. They only want people from Washington because when it comes to money, they all vote the same. And they make a good show that they're against each other. But a lot of times it's, money for Ukraine, suddenly it appears. this is, they're always backroom deals. And that's unfortunately what politics is all about anymore.
Mr. Armstrong, please, I need to have a global overview, and I'll take some piece of your latest word. I live in Sicily. I live surrounded for military bases by NATO and the USA force. So my question is a personal question, but is also a professional question, because there is a fight between Europe, Ukraine, and Russia. It could be the start for another world war. But can a war in Eastern Europe act as a lifeline for global finance, multinational, especially for USA industrial sector? Maybe that's the reason of the battle that we see every day in Ukraine.
Look, just look at Yugoslavia. When Yugoslavia broke up, it broke up according to ethnic lines. All right. Ukraine, why are we not doing the same thing? There was the Minsk agreement. The Donbass are Russians who have lived there for hundreds of years. Zelensky had promised peace when he ran for election. He's done the opposite. And he's outlawed their language, outlawed their religion. He changed, Orthodox Christmas. They have to celebrate it on December 25th. Said they're no longer allowed to report to the patriarch in Moscow. It has to be his that he set up in Kiev. You don't do these kind of things. If you're trying to create peace and unity, when you're attacking somebody's religion, their language, of course you're going to get civil war. I think if you looked at Canada, if Canada tried to outlaw French, I think you're going to have a civil war. Same thing in the United States. You can't outlaw Spanish. These are not things that promote civilization or peace. So, and in all honesty, over 1 million people have died in Ukraine. Does anybody really care about Ukrainians? The answer is no. This is all about just getting to Russia. That's it. Merkel from Germany, supposedly, she even told the press, I don't know if she had too much to drink or what, but she told the press that, they never intended to honor the Minsk agreement. It was just to buy time for Ukraine to build an army. That implies they have wanted war from the very beginning, not peace. And that's why I say they need war, and this is their exit strategy for the debt crisis. Unfortunately, Ukrainians are basically the lamb on the altar to be slaughtered. They don't care about them. They do not care about Ukraine. It's a country that's just going to be absolutely destroyed, and they're not going to be giving them money to rebuild it. That's not on the agenda. It's just propaganda. It usually is that way. But they have been trying to conquer Russia, and I know some of these neocons. I've dealt with them for a long time. My opinion is that when they grew up just hating Russia and China because of communism. You had Khrushchev say, "We will bury you." All right. That was their economic philosophy at the time. Well, communism fell. And the West should have recognized that, but it did not. It's like, I think that these people just hate Russians, and they're just upset that communism fell and they didn't get to shoot anybody. They still want war. We had a global economy, and they've done everything to undermine that. Once you imposed the sanctions on Russia, China started realizing they could do it to them. Other countries started withdrawing, India, etc. Now you have the BRICS nation. We once had a global economy. That's what made Rome work. All right. Rome had freedom of religion. There weren't tariffs on so somebody in France could sell anything they manufactured to somebody down in Syria. That's what Rome was about. Rome showed us how to create peace. All right. The Christians misinterpreted Rome. They said, oh, they have all these gods. No, they don't. It's just that they had freedom of religion. They allowed each region to keep their god. You didn't have to just accept mine. So that created the false image that they had so many different gods. They respected everybody's religion. That's really what it was about. I mean, we are doing everything exactly opposite of what the Roman Empire did. The Pax Romana lasted for about 1,000 years. As long as everybody economically benefited, it was better to stay inside Rome than to leave, because you could manufacture whatever you wanted, pots or whatever, and sell them to someplace else. So expanded your market, created jobs. That's the recipe to world peace. But nobody wants to follow it.
Okay, perfect. I have only one more question for you. Let's try to focus the horizon for quality West in a 5-10-year reign.
We're probably going to see our forms of government being a republics will come to an end probably by 2032. The same thing, more or less, when Caesar crossed the Rubicon because the republic was so corrupt. We have that same problem. There was a debt crisis when Caesar crossed the Rubicon. Nothing's really changed. When he crossed the Rubicon, all the cities cheered and they opened their gates. It was the Senate that fled to Asia because they were so corrupt and they didn't have the support of the people. So we're looking at the same thing here, that republics are historically the most corrupt. And so we're probably going to see that's what all this chaos is about. People are beginning to realize that, the governments are not what they're supposed to be. Things are not working out the way they were. So, I mean, this 2024 election is going to show a lot of people, that the system's broke. So, people will then change the form of government, but only when they begin to see it's broke. So, our computer shows after 2032 will probably create a new form of government. I'm hoping that it would be more of a direct democracy where we should be allowed to vote. Do you want to go to war with Russia? Yes or no? We're never asked these questions. They make their own decisions and we're supposed to follow. That's not democracy. They call it democracy, but it's not. It's more of authoritarianism. Even in Vietnam, you were 18 years old, you could be drafted to go to war and die. You were not old enough to have a drink, and you were not old enough to vote. That's not democracy. Where did they have a right to vote for anything? This is the problem with our system. The politicians make it sound nice. Oh, we don't have democracies. We don't get to vote on anything. We have a republic. All right. So, maybe there'll be somebody like Caesar and crosses the Rubicon and finally forces everything to change. But That's what we're really looking at. And these things, no form of government has ever lasted, really more than 250 to 300 years. It's just our turn. That's it. Communism collapsed. It's just our turn for the same thing. So if we understand what the problems are, we can create a better life on the other side.